So in our final week of lessons, we're thinking about how to evaluate the programs that you are potentially creating. So there are a few questions you want to think about before you even start, because making sure you have the answers to these will inform decisions as you develop your evaluation plan. First of all, who is the evaluation really for? Are you writing a report for a principal, for an education board, for other teachers? Are you just doing this for yourself to check your work? Who is it for? And similarly, what will the results be used for? And you could tie this into what is the purpose of the evaluation. So will the results be used to improve the program, to make a judgment about whether to keep the program? It could, you might even eventually face some kind of ethical decision down the road where it seems like an evaluation of a program is more like an excuse to try to find a reason to cut programs because of lack of funding. Knowing all of those things going into it will impact the decisions that you make. And actually, one huge thing where you have to pay attention to is it formative so are you losing the results in order to improve the program, or a final summative judgment of the program? And that's a really big difference in terms of what you focus on in your evaluation. Of course, you need to also ask, is the evaluation really necessary? So I think you could think about our society as a little overly test driven. You may have noticed, for example, that students feel kind of burnt out by the amount of STAR testing. Not to say that the STAR test is necessarily have anything to do with your evaluation of your program, although it could. But it's more that if you evaluate something all the time, there's not time for real growth and development before suddenly you're back into some kind of testing. I think we have a tendency to test and evaluate almost too often. Now, what I would personally recommend is that anytime you begin a new curriculum, that you do an evaluation in that first semester or first year. And of course, hopefully some types of measures that are going throughout the year, not just, a final summative type of thing. After you've done it for the first year, though, and made appropriate changes, unless it was really rough that first year, if most of the things went pretty well in that first year, backing off and letting the program really develop, but checking in, every few years to see how it's going, and maybe using different types of assessments every few years, just to make sure that everything's on track. Of course, anytime that you plan to run an assessment of a program, evaluation of a program, you're going to have to invest either people's time or people's money. So keeping in mind how much of time or money that your evaluation will take, you have to just be aware. Make it feasible. Okay, this is actually like my third run and I keep forgetting to change that error. Okay, so let's see if we can make it through. Something's coming up down there. When you look at what you want to collect, there are lots of different ways you could go. So some of the possible useful information that you could collect in your evaluation plan, you could try to look at learning in terms of amount of learning or quality of learning. So how far did you make it? How many topics did you cover? Or how deep did you go? And what is the amount of skill that you developed in each area? Then also you could look at the quality of teaching somewhat independently from the quality or amount of learning. And you could also look at the quality of curriculum design. And an easy way to think about finding the differences between teaching and curriculum design are when students say things like, I love the teacher, they explain things so well, but I hated all the handouts. That's a curriculum problem. The teacher probably pulled those from some kind of curriculum that was pre-designed, and it's not reflective of the teacher's ability to teach, but they're probably pulling from a curriculum that's already been designed for them. Of course, if the teacher's making all those handouts, stuff might be somewhat outside of your responsibility. However, the goal of a curriculum design is often to develop some of those guides for the teacher, right? Okay, so you could also look at satisfaction. Of course, are the learners happy with what they're learning? Do the teachers feel comfortable and confident with what they're teaching and satisfied with the amount that students are learning? But also, is the sponsor, if you have one, satisfied? So if you're looking, for example, at a nonprofit organization that offers ESL classes or something, and you have a sponsor providing money to help support that learning, are they happy with what you're doing? Because if not, right, you might lose the funding. So you've got to pay some attention to a sponsor. Now, there's two additional things that I want to talk about that are outside specifically learning, immediate learning or satisfaction. One is later success of graduates. So you could tie this, of course, into learning, but it's not necessarily exactly the same thing, but probably is related. However, you cannot address later success of graduates immediately. This would be something that would have to be a long-term goal. For example, if you were looking at third graders, how did they fare in their fourth grade year? Or even their fifth grade year, sixth grade. So we can look quite a bit of ways down the road, but all of these assessments take time. If you're teaching a class in college, do the graduates go on to get useful jobs? But it all takes time. So think of that one as one of the hardest ones to do in a quick evaluation. And then, of course, you also have to think about the financial profitability of the course, especially at a for-profit school. Some curriculum are much more expensive to employ than others. And if it's an expensive curriculum, that's okay if you bring in enough students and the company thinks it's worth it. But if you design something expensive that doesn't get enough students to make it profitable, then you could run into a problem. Okay, so those are some of the pieces of information that you could consider collecting, and I want to take you through how your particular goal for the evaluation could impact what you're collecting, basically. So if you're looking to improve the course, you're probably looking at a formative assessment. So we're over here. Formative assessments are you're thinking of along the way in order to continue to form and improve. In a formative assessment, you're usually looking at causes of things, or what are kind of some of the processes involved, and maybe where are the kinks in the processes. And so you're not just trying to decide like that worked well or that didn't work well. You're trying to see what led to that working well or not. And of course, that may require that you pay some attention to individuals and how they reacted to things and how they played a role in the success or failure of an activity or of the curriculum. One of the things that you have to pay attention to in the formative assessment is the results are often discussed with individuals. And it's a discussion in that it goes back and forth. So the curriculum designer or the evaluator might say, hey, I noticed blank, blank, blank about the course, and I'm hoping we could talk about ways of improving those areas. And the teachers could say, oh, I totally see that. That's a great suggestion. Or, but wait, have you considered this? Because it's not the curriculum designer trying to shove everything. Now, there can be some aspects of this as a mentoring type of thing. So telling a teacher, I notice that you actually don't do a lot of this in the classroom and I think it would be helpful. That's mentoring, right? That's professional development. But notice it's a discussion, so the teachers have a chance to talk too, which is useful for getting even more feedback. This is very different from a summative evaluation. In a summative evaluation, you're interested in judging the course. So is it good? Is it bad? Do we want to keep it? Do we want to check it? So often you're looking at some kind of results, but in relationship to some kind of standard. So we said, for example, maybe in your learning objectives that you want 80% of students to be able to do something. At the end of the course, can 80% of your students do that thing? There could be other standards like, 60% of students will say that they agree that they like the course or higher. I think there's lots of different standards that you could use, but you're looking for aggregated group data And did it perform to whatever standard you're trying to hold it to? And these are used for some kind of decision of adequacy. Are we keeping the course? Are we getting rid of it? Does it lose funding, gain funding, something like that? The results are not usually discussed with the teachers in a way that they can go back and forth and provide input. Instead, often these are results that are presented in a report. So think about giving the school the report, giving the teachers the report, and that's the end of it. Okay, now you're going to have to think about a way to develop your own evaluation plan. There are so many different tools that you can use. I'm going to try to talk you through most of these. The ones that I think are most useful, I'll probably spend more time on, but we'll see if we can make our way through. So the first thing is amount of learning. Last week you talked, I talked about, you thought about the ways of testing student learning. And so here you'll notice that one of the things is that you can use achievement or proficiency tests. And keep in mind, right, there's short-term proficiency tests, short-term achievement tests, but also the long-term achievement tests. You can also use proficiency tests to see, if the student has overall kind of improved. Testing is one way of determining amount of learning, though. Notice you can also just ask students if they thought they learned things, how confident and comfortable they feel, or how much they feel like they've accomplished. All right. You can also, one of the quickest ways to see how much is being learned is if you have a course book that they were trying to use, and maybe you said you're going to cover 15 units in 15 weeks, and you look at the course book content of what's in each unit, and then you see how far they actually make it. Maybe they only covered 10 units. Did they get through enough? Did they have a solid amount of learning? And of course, we can always interview students as well, talking with them about how much they feel like they learned, how much they felt like they covered. Was it going too fast? Or was it going too slow? I consider it a victory, in a sense, when I get course evaluations at the end of the semester where one student saying it went too slow and one student saying it went too fast. I'm like, I found the sweet spot. So we can actually get some sense from learners what amount of learning we're trying to aim for. Okay. The next, again, you see the assessments back. So for quality of learning, again, you can do some kinds of tests, but you can also observe lessons. Now, one of the things about observing lessons is you can do pretty unstructured observations. Just go in and sit down and take notes on the learning that you're seeing. You can also use rubrics, though. So you could go in with different items you want to look at and rate, or you could even just do checklists. So I saw the teacher ask for more than, learner regurgitation. They had to like really think or analyze or something. And then if you see that, check. So you have different ways of doing observations. Each one is useful in its own way. I think that checklists and rubrics are particularly useful if you know exactly what you're looking for in that particular time, and to maybe try to keep it systematic across teachers. However, they're also kind of limiting. You're going to be thinking about just those items and scoring them on just those items. So you may not notice some other amazing thing that they're doing that's not on your rubric. Okay, again, you can interview learners. You can also listen to teachers through diaries that they're keeping or do a study of research reports. Okay, now for quality of teaching, for this one they talk about lesson observations, but they focus on more of the systematic ones, so the rubrics or the checklists. Again, I think both are useful, so keep in mind that you could do either, and actually you might want to do both throughout the course of a semester, if possible. You can also interview teachers, especially after a class. How do you think it went? What did you notice students did well? What activities went smoothly? What was horrible? Did anything unexpected happen? All of those types of questions can help get a sense of what teachers think of their teaching. Of course, you can do self-report scales. Keep in mind that a lot of scales, you might be thinking of like Likert scales here. That would be a good thing to think of. Often for the university, right, we have learner self-reports on the quality of teaching, course evaluations at the end of every semester, and those are scaled. So often you're provided with statements and then you agree to some, you choose the level to which you agree with those statements or how good it is, good to poor type scales. The teacher can also do some self-reports of their teaching. Again, the study of research reports. You can also look at tests, right? So in theory, if the teaching is good, the achievement test will be high, although keep in mind that a lot of other factors play a role, such as we know poverty plays a much higher role than quality of teaching in a lot of test scenarios. So I would caution against using that too heavily in assessing quality of teaching. Oh, and we can also just kind of take a moment to list staff qualifications and make sure that, the teaching stands a chance of being the quality that we're hoping for. Okay, I apologize. I was just trying to move my mouse. Okay. Again, we can go back through our course books. We created checklists earlier in the semester. You could use those again with the course book to go back through it and maybe compare it to something new. Maybe you heard about a great new book on the market, you want to give it another evaluation. And you can ask teachers and learners to fill out questionnaires about the textbook. I liked it. I thought it was engaging. I liked the pictures. Questions like that. Of course, for the curriculum design, you can use the checklist. You can also use the syllabus here. So from the syllabus, you should be able to get the major picture of the course. And does it do what you want it to? Can you see all of those learning objectives in the syllabus? Can you see how the activities tie into the learning objectives? Does it sound doable? Right. So there's lots of questions you can ask just based off of the syllabus. It's supposed to give the whole picture of the course. And then you can look at particular course material. So you could pick a day or two and look at the materials. Do they seem like quality? Do you see too much repetition? Things like that. All right, for degree of later success, you could, I think for most of you that are teaching lower levels, what would probably be most useful is actually the last one, later achievement records such as GPA. So keeping track of their GPA in later classes, keeping track of passing or failing in later classes, grades in later classes, all of that, well, I guess that's GPA. I was trying to think of another one to add in there. If you have any like high-risk programs, identifying whether they're getting tracked into those more or less after they go through your course. And actually, one of the things, so this has actually been used, the tracking of like high-risk types of programs. For example, I was reading Garcia and Garcia. They have a textbook on Hispanic students in education. And one of the things that they were trying to track was what was the impact of a pre-K program and different types of pre-K programs. And they were looking at how many of those students got put into special education types of courses, things to help boost students back up later, different types of programs, and of course they noticed that pre-K programs helped prevent, students being labeled as special needs later. Now, if you're dealing with older students, maybe looking at graduates that have finished and questionnaires to try to figure out, how it's helping them. Maybe even asking employers whether, they feel like they've gotten a quality employee, depending on what's appropriate for your course. And then for satisfaction, probably the most common types are questionnaires or interviews. The questionnaires can use these self-report scales, but you never know. You might be able to also get a little creative. And one that's kind of interesting here at the very bottom is, do learners come back? Now, in public education, this may or may not be as important, although down here in Texas, I've noticed a lot more choice among schools. So you can enroll in different schools, right? You're not necessarily assigned a single one that you have to go to, like in other areas. So re-enrollment might actually be a little bit of an interesting statistic, but it would be interesting to see, you know, for a program where there's completely free choice, do they come back and take more courses with you? Okay, so you have lots of different options. In some ways, you're only limited by your creativity, I suppose, but you need to get at more than one thing. So is the only, you know, if you tried to say, I'm going to evaluate this program, and so I'm going to use achievement tests, you haven't looked at the whole program. You've looked at what students learned, and that's one important part. But if everyone's miserable doing it, you probably haven't created a successful curriculum. So looking at a variety of measures can help you make sure that your program is well-rounded. Okay, so that is the main thing for this week. You're keeping these ideas in mind as you work to finish your final project for the course, which is a summary presentation of what you've done in your first two projects, the needs analysis and the goals, content, and sequencing, but then also a bit of an evaluation plan. So you've got to have, you've got to develop some of this. Okay, that's it for this week. If I can figure out how to stop it. Okay.